The silent breakfast table, the morning light filtered through the crystal windows of the Sterling mansion, casting long shadows across the mahogany dining table where three figures sat in profound silence. Victoria Sterling, once the most formidable CEO in the tech industry, now looked like a shadow of her former self. Her usually immaculate blonde hair hung limp around her shoulders, and dark circles under her emerald eyes spoke of countless sleepless nights. Before her sat two identical plates, each containing carefully prepared pancakes cut into heart shapes, fresh strawberries arranged like flowers, and organic maple syrup warmed to the perfect temperature. The food remained untouched, growing cold as 7-year-old twins Emma and Grace Sterling stared blankly ahead, their small bodies swimming in oversized pajamas that hung loose on their increasingly frail frames. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached across the table, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, my darlings, just one tiny bite. For Mommy." Her words carried the weight of 4 months of desperate pleading, each syllable heavy with exhaustion and fear. Emma, her auburn curls now dull and lifeless, pushed the plate away with skeletal fingers. "Daddy used to make funny faces with the pancakes," she whispered, her voice so quiet it barely disturbed the air. "He said they were magic breakfast smiles." Grace nodded slowly, clutching a worn teddy bear that had belonged to their father. "Magic only works when Daddy's here," she added, her blue eyes vacant and hollow. "Without him, everything just tastes like sadness." The words pierced Victoria's heart like daggers. David had been gone for 4 months now, taken suddenly by a heart attack while on a business trip to Tokyo. He was only 34, healthy and vibrant one moment, gone forever the next. The twins had been Daddy's girls, and his absence had created a void so profound that they had simply stopped engaging with life itself. The CEO's crumbling. Empire Victoria's phone buzzed insistently on the table, displaying urgent messages from her assistant about the board meeting she was supposed to be leading in 20 minutes. Sterling Technologies, the company she had built from nothing into a billion-dollar empire, was facing its own crisis. Without her steady leadership, over the past months, contracts were being lost. Investors were growing nervous, and competitors were circling like vultures. But how could she focus on market projections and quarterly reports when her daughters were slowly fading away before her eyes? In the 4 months since David's death, Emma and Grace had each lost nearly 20 pounds. Their pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, delivered an ultimatum just yesterday that still rang in Victoria's ears like a death sentence. "Mrs. Sterling, if the girls don't start eating within the next 2 weeks, we'll have no choice but to consider hospitalization and feeding tubes. Their bodies simply cannot sustain this level of malnutrition much longer." Victoria closed her eyes, remembering how David used to handle difficult mornings. He would sing silly songs, create elaborate stories about brave princesses who needed magical breakfast fuel for their adventures, or perform ridiculous dances that would send the girls into fits of giggles. She had tried all of these tactics, but without David's natural warmth and humor, her attempts felt forced and hollow. The irony was not lost on her that she could negotiate million-dollar deals, inspire teams of hundreds, and solve complex technological problems. Yet she was completely powerless to help her own children. Eat a simple meal. Mrs. Rodriguez's gentle wisdom, the soft footsteps of Mrs. Rodriguez. Their longtime housekeeper approached from the kitchen. Lena Rodriguez had been with the Sterling family since before the twins were born, and her maternal instincts had only grown stronger in the wake of David's death. She set a steaming cup of chamomile tea beside Victoria's untouched coffee and knelt beside the twins' chairs. "Miss Pequegas," she said gently, using the Spanish endearment that always made the girls smile before their world had shattered. "Your Papa, he would be so worried to see you not eating. Remember how he used to say, 'Strong girls need strong food to grow into strong women'?" Emma looked up at Mrs. Rodriguez with eyes that seemed far too old for her 7-year-old face. "But we don't want to be strong without Daddy. Being strong hurts too much." Mrs. Rodriguez exchanged a meaningful glance with Victoria over the children's heads. They both understood that grief had become a language the twins spoke fluently, and neither of them knew how to translate hope back into their vocabulary. "Senora Victoria," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly, Perhaps it is time to consider the gardener position we discussed. The children, they need something to nurture, something to grow. When the heart is broken, sometimes working with growing things can help it heal. Victoria had been putting off hiring a new landscaper since their previous company had quit, claiming the atmosphere of sadness around the estate was too depressing for their workers. The once magnificent gardens that David had lovingly tended, with the girls every weekend, now stood overgrown and neglected, a living metaphor for their family's emotional state. The garden's silent plea after another failed breakfast. Victoria found herself walking through the French doors onto the stone terrace that overlooked the expansive grounds. The sight that greeted her was heartbreaking. David's prized rose garden, where he had taught the twins to identify different varieties and colors, was now a tangle of weeds and brown, withered blooms. The vegetable patch, where the family had grown tomatoes, carrots, and herbs for their summer salads, was completely overrun with invasive plants. Most painful of all was the small section David had designated as Emma and Grace's magic garden. Here, raised beds built to child height had once overflowed with cherry tomatoes, snap peas, and strawberry plants that the girls could tend and harvest themselves. Now, those same beds were empty except for dried stems and scattered debris. Victoria sank onto a weathered bench that David had built the summer before his death, placing her head in her hands as tears finally came. She had been so focused on being strong for her daughters that she had forgotten how to grieve for herself. The weight of single parenthood, running a major corporation, watching her children slowly disappear into their sorrow, had finally broken through her carefully constructed walls. A mother's desperate decision, the sound of her phone ringing, pulled Victoria back to the present. Her assistant's voice was urgent and strained. "Mrs. Sterling, the board is asking if you're planning to attend today's meeting. The Peterson contract is on the table, and they need your approval for the merger negotiations." Victoria looked back toward the house, where she could see Emma and Grace sitting motionless in the living room, staring at a television that wasn't even turned on. The Peterson contract was worth $50 million to Sterling Technologies. But what was money compared to her daughters' lives? "Cancel the meeting," Victoria said firmly, surprising herself with the decisiveness in her voice. "Tell the board I'm taking an indefinite leave of absence to deal with a family crisis. Have them postpone all major decisions until further notice." Her assistant's shocked silence spoke volumes, but Victoria had made her choice. Sterling Technologies had survived difficult periods before, and it would survive without her for a while longer. Her daughters might not. After ending the call, Victoria made 2 more phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Dr. Martinez, requesting an immediate consultation about alternative therapy approaches for childhood grief and eating disorders. The second was to Mrs. Rodriguez. "Lena, place that advertisement for a gardener immediately, but make it specific. I want someone who understands that this isn't just about landscaping. We need someone who can help bring life back to this place. Someone who understands that gardens and hearts sometimes heal together." The advertisement's hidden message that evening, as Emma and Grace finally fell asleep after another day of barely consuming anything more than a few sips of milk, Victoria sat at her laptop crafting an advertisement that felt more like a prayer than a job posting. Seeking experienced gardener for private estate. Must have expertise in restoring neglected gardens and working around families with special circumstances. Previous experience with therapeutic horticulture preferred. This position requires not just horticultural skills, but patience, understanding, and the ability to see potential for new growth even in the most damaged soil. Competitive salary for the right person who understands that sometimes the most important gardens are the ones that grow in human hearts. As she posted the advertisement on various job boards and gardening websites, Victoria whispered a silent prayer to whatever forces might be listening. "Please, send us someone who can help. Send us someone who understands that we're not just trying to save plants, we're trying to save my little girls. We're trying to save what's left of our family." Outside, the wind rustled through the overgrown garden, and for just a moment, Victoria could have sworn she heard David's voice carried on the breeze, telling her that help was coming, that love had a way of finding those who needed it most, and that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grew from the most broken ground. The house settled into its nightly silence, but something had shifted. In placing that advertisement, Victoria had opened a door to possibility. And tomorrow would bring the first response that would change everything about their story of loss and lead them toward an unexpected tale of healing, hope, and a love she never saw coming. The unexpected arrival, 3 days after Victoria posted the advertisement. She received only one response that stood out from the handful of typical landscaping inquiries. The email was brief, but carried an unusual warmth that made her pause during her morning coffee ritual, which had become her only peaceful moment before facing another day of worry about Emma and Grace. Dear Mrs. Sterling, I read your posting about garden restoration. I understand that some gardens need more than just technical expertise to flourish again. I've spent the last 15 years learning that healing broken earth often means understanding broken hearts. If you're willing to meet with someone who sees gardening as a form of gentle therapy, I'd be honored to discuss how I might help restore life to your family's outdoor spaces. Respectfully, Noah Bennett. Something about the message resonated with Victoria in a way she couldn't quite explain. Carefully worded advertisement. She found herself reading it 3 times before picking up her phone to call the number he'd provided. Noah's voice was warm and deep when he answered, carrying a gentleness that immediately put Victoria at ease. They arranged to meet that afternoon, and as Victoria hung up the phone, she felt the first flutter of hope she'd experienced in months. Perhaps this stranger might be the key to bringing life back to their wilted world. First impressions. Noah Bennett arrived precisely on time, driving a well-maintained but modest pickup truck that looked like it had seen countless gardening projects. Victoria watched from the living room window as he stepped out, immediately struck by his presence. He was tall and lean, probably in his late 30s, with sandy brown hair that caught the afternoon sunlight and hands that moved with the careful precision of someone who spent his life working with delicate growing things. What captured her attention most, however, was the way he approached their neglected garden. While most contractors would head straight to the front door, Noah walked slowly through the overgrown paths, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. He knelt beside wilted flower beds, gently touching soil and examining root systems. With the tenderness of a doctor examining a patient. "Oh, Mommy, who's the man in Daddy's garden?" Emma's small voice startled Victoria from her observations. Both twins had appeared beside her at the window, showing more interest in something than they had in weeks. "He might be someone who can help make the garden beautiful again," Victoria replied carefully, not wanting to raise hopes that might be crushed. Grace pressed her small nose against the glass. "Daddy would want someone nice to take care of his flowers." The simple statement brought tears to Victoria's eyes. It was the first time either twin had mentioned David without immediate sadness overwhelming them. The gentle introduction when Victoria opened the front door. Noah was examining the climbing roses that David had trained along the entrance arbor. His touch was reverent as he carefully untangled dead vines from healthy growth, and Victoria noticed he was humming softly under his breath. "Mrs. Sterling?" He turned with a smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Your garden has incredible bones beneath all this neglect. Someone loved this place very much." "My husband did," Victoria replied, surprised by how easily the words came. "Different plants and flowers." Noah's expression softened with understanding. "I can see his touch everywhere. The way these beds are laid out, the thoughtful plant selections, the child height raised sections over there. This was designed by someone who understood that gardens are meant to be shared." As they talked, Victoria found herself relaxing for the first time in months. Noah asked thoughtful questions about David's favorite areas, the twins' previous involvement in gardening, and the family's long-term vision for the space. Most importantly, he never once suggested removing or dramatically changing David's original design. "I believe in working with what exists," Noah explained as they walked through the overgrown paths. "Good gardens, like good relationships, are built on strong foundations. They just sometimes need gentle guidance to flourish again. Small miracles begin." The twins' curiosity eventually overcame their shyness, and they ventured onto the terrace. While Noah and Victoria were discussing restoration timelines, Emma clutched her worn teddy bear, while Grace stayed close to her sister's side. but both girls watched Noah with fascination as he carefully examined a struggling butterfly bush. "Hello there," Noah said gently, not making any sudden movements that might startle them. "I'm Noah. I'm hoping to help your garden feel better. It's been 6 since Daddy went to heaven," Emma whispered. Her first voluntary conversation with a stranger since David's death. Noah nodded seriously, treating her statement with the gravity it deserved. Sometimes gardens get very sad when they lose someone who loved them. But the beautiful thing about plants is that they're very good at healing, especially when they have people who care about them. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of seeds. "These are sunflower seeds. Your daddy planted some sunflowers over there last year, and they dropped seeds before winter came. Would you like to see something amazing?" The girls nodded, moving closer as Noah led them to a patch of seemingly empty soil. "Look carefully," he said, pointing to tiny green shoots barely visible among the weeds. "Your daddy's sunflowers made? Baby sunflowers, and they're growing all by themselves, waiting for someone to notice them and help them get strong." Grace gasped softly. "Daddy's flowers made babies?" "That's how love works in gardens," Noah explained with infinite patience. "When someone loves plants the way your daddy did, that love keeps growing even when the person has to go away. These little sunflowers are proof that his love is still here." Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion as she watched her daughters engage with genuine interest for the first time in months. There was something magical about the way Noah spoke to them, never talking down or oversimplifying, but making complex concepts accessible through the natural world. The first day of work, Noah began work the following Monday, arriving early with a truck full of tools and supplies. Victoria had decided to work from home that week, telling herself it was to supervise the new gardener, but knowing deep down that she needed to witness whatever transformation might occur. From her home office window, she could see Noah working methodically through David's neglected vegetable garden. Unlike the aggressive restoration she had expected, his approach was surprisingly gentle. He carefully separated living plants from dead ones, watered struggling survivors, began the slow process of rebuilding the soil with compost and organic matter. What struck Victoria most was his patience. When the twins appeared at the kitchen window, watching his every move with growing fascination, Noah would pause his work to wave or hold up interesting discoveries like unusual insects or particularly beautiful flowers that had survived the months of neglect by lunchtime. Emma and Grace had worked up the courage to venture outside with sandwiches they'd barely touched, sitting on the terrace steps where they could observe Noah's progress more closely. Victoria followed with her own lunch, touched by the sight of her daughters showing interest in anything beyond their grief. "Mr. Noah," Grace called out hesitantly, "are you going to plant new things too?" "Only with your permission," Noah replied, setting down his tools and approaching the girls slowly. "This is your family's garden, and I think any new plants should be chosen by people who live here. What kinds of flowers do you think your daddy would want growing here?" The question sparked the first real conversation the twins had engaged in since David's death. They talked about his favorite colors, his love for plants that attracted butterflies, and his dream of growing a pumpkin patch where they could choose their own jack-o'-lanterns for Halloween. As Victoria listened to her daughter's animated discussion with Noah, she felt something shift inside her chest. For months, she had been drowning in the responsibility of keeping everyone afloat, while her own grief threatened to pull her under. But watching this gentle man connect with her children through the simple language of growing things, she began to remember what hope felt like, the language of growth over the next 2 weeks. A routine developed that brought structure back to their chaotic household. Noah would arrive each morning as the twins were finishing their still minimal breakfast. Outside, despite their ongoing resistance to most activities, he never pushed them to participate directly in the garden work, but he made sure they could see everything he was doing from their preferred observation posts. When he discovered earthworms while turning soil, he would call them over to explain how worms helped plants grow stronger. Appeared in the restored flower beds, he would point out their colors and patterns with infectious enthusiasm. Most remarkably, the twins began asking questions about growing things, which led to conversations about seasons, weather, and the cycle of life and death in nature. Through Noah's gentle guidance, they started to understand that endings could also be beginnings, that death in gardens often led to new life sprouting from the same soil. Victoria found herself drawn to these impromptu lessons, initially watching from windows, but gradually joining the small audience for Noah's patient explanations. She began to see how he was using the garden as a metaphor for healing, helping her daughters understand that growth was possible even after loss, that tending to living things could be a way of honoring those who were gone. The change in Emma and Grace was subtle but undeniable. They still ate very little, but they had begun sleeping better and showing interest in activities beyond staring into space. Dr. Martinez, during their weekly check-in, noted that while their weight hadn't increased significantly, their emotional responsiveness had improved markedly. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it," he advised Victoria. Sometimes psychological healing has to come before physical healing can follow. Unexpected connections. As the third week of Noah's employment began, Victoria realized she was looking forward to his arrival each morning with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the garden's progress. There was something deeply calming about his presence, a steadiness that seemed to anchor her family's chaotic emotions in ways she hadn't expected. She began finding excuses to spend time outside while he worked, bringing him coffee or asking questions about his restoration plans. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond gardening to include discussions about grief, healing, and the challenge of helping children process incomprehensible loss. "You're very good with them," Victoria told him one afternoon as they watched Emma and Grace carefully watering newly planted seedlings under his supervision. "Do you have children of your own?" Something flickered across Noah's expression, too quick for Victoria to interpret, but when he smiled it seemed forced for the first time since she'd known him. "I understand children who are hurting," he said quietly. "Sometimes that's enough." There was clearly more to Noah's story than he was sharing, but Victoria sensed that pushing for details would violate the trust that was slowly building between them. Instead, she found herself grateful for his presence and increasingly aware of the man beneath the gentle gardener persona. Noah was intelligent and well-read, able to discuss everything from business strategy to literature with surprising depth. He was also handsome in a weathered, authentic way that was completely different from David's polished corporate appearance. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely care about her family's well-being in a way that went far beyond professional obligation. As Victoria tucked the twins into bed that night, listening to them chatter excitedly about the butterfly garden Noah was planning, she realized that somewhere in the process of healing her daughters' hearts, her own heart was beginning to awaken to possibilities she thought had died with David. Thought both thrilled and terrified her, opening doorways to hope she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. The truth revealed 6 weeks after Noah's arrival, the Sterling estate had transformed into something approaching its former beauty. The gardens bloomed with carefully chosen flowers that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. The vegetable patches produced the first harvest the twins had seen since their father's death. And most miraculously, Emma and Grace had begun eating. Again, with genuine appetite, Victoria had been working in her home office when she heard unfamiliar laughter drifting through the open windows. Real laughter, the kind she thought her daughters might never produce again. Abandoning her computer, she hurried outside to find Emma and Grace helping Noah harvest cherry tomatoes, their faces bright with joy as they sampled the sun-warmed fruit directly from the vine. "Mommy, look," Grace called out, running over with dirt-stained hands full of tiny tomatoes. "Noah says Daddy's plants made these for us and they taste like sunshine." Emma nodded enthusiastically, tomato juice staining her chin. "We picked enough to make Daddy's special pasta sauce tonight. Noah remembers the recipe Daddy used to make." Victoria's heart stopped. "What do you mean Noah remembers Daddy's recipe?" The twins looked confused by her sharp tone, but Noah straightened slowly from where he'd been kneeling among the tomato plants. His expression carried a mixture of guilt and resignation that immediately put Victoria on alert. "We should talk," he said quietly. "Girls, why don't you take those tomatoes to Mrs. Rodriguez and ask her to help you wash them for dinner?" As the twins scampered toward the house, Victoria felt the familiar weight of dread settling in her stomach. "What aren't you telling me, Noah?" "What?" He gestured toward the bench David had built, and they sat together in the garden that had become a symbol of their family's healing. For a long moment, Noah stared at his hands, clearly struggling with words. "I knew David," he said finally. "We met at a grief support group 3 years ago, after I lost my daughter, Lily, in a car accident. David was there because he was struggling with his father's death and how to help you and the girls cope with the loss." Victoria felt the world tilt around her. "You knew my husband? All this time? You've been working in his garden, talking to his children, and you never thought to mention that you knew him." "I wanted to tell you from the beginning," Noah said desperately, "but I was afraid you'd think I had ulterior motives, that I was taking advantage of your grief somehow. David talked about you and the twins constantly during group sessions. He was so proud of his family, so worried about how you'd all manage if something happened to him." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. He was worried about dying? Did he know something was wrong with his heart? "No, nothing like that," Noah said quickly. "He was just a devoted father and husband who wanted to make sure his family would be okay no matter what. He asked me once if I would promise to check on you if anything ever happened to him. I thought he was being overly cautious, but after the heart attack, I couldn't forget that conversation." Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the terrace as emotions warred within her chest. Anger at being deceived battled with gratitude for everything Noah had done for her family, while underneath both feelings lurked something that felt dangerously like relief. "So this has all been, what, a promise to a dead man? Charity work to ease your guilty conscience?" Noah rose and approached her carefully, his voice intense with emotion. "It started that way, I won't lie to you. But Victoria, what I feel for you and the girls now has nothing to do with David and everything to do with the woman and children I've come to love over these past weeks." The word love hung in the air between them like a bridge Victoria wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Confronting the past that evening, after the twins were asleep, Victoria found herself unable to concentrate on anything except the revelation about Noah's connection to David. She wandered through the house looking at family photos with new eyes, wondering what conversations her husband had shared with this man who had become so important to their healing. She discovered Noah still in the garden, working by moonlight to finish planting a section of winter vegetables. The sight of him, so dedicated to their family's well-being, even after their difficult conversation, softened her anger but intensified her confusion. "You don't have to keep working tonight," she said, approaching him in the silvery darkness. "We need to finish." Talking about this, Noah set down his tools and faced her fully. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I should have told you the truth from the beginning." "Yes, you should have," Victoria agreed. "But I'm trying to understand why you didn't. What exactly did David tell you about us?" Noah sat heavily on the ground, leaning against a fence post. As he gathered his thoughts, he talked about how brilliant you were, how you'd built your company from nothing while still being an amazing mother. He worried that you worked too hard, that you carried too much responsibility on your shoulders. He was concerned about how you'd cope if you ever had to handle everything alone. The description sounded exactly like something David would say, and Victoria felt tears pricking her eyes. "He talked about the twins constantly," Noah continued. "How Emma had your business sense, and Grace had his artistic temperament. How they both loved helping in the garden, and how he hoped they'd always find comfort in growing things. He was so proud when they learned to identify different plants or when they successfully grew their first vegetables from seed." Victoria sank to the ground beside him, her anger gradually giving way to a bittersweet ache. "He never told me he was attending a grief support group. He was trying to be strong for you," Noah explained gently. "His father's death hit him harder than he let on, and he wanted to process those feelings somewhere safe so he could be the support you needed at home." The revelation painted David in an even more loving light, if that were possible. Even in his own grief, he had been thinking about his family's needs first. "Tell me about your daughter," Victoria said softly. "About Lily." Noah's face transformed with pain and love. She was 9 when she died, Lily Rose Bennett, and she was everything beautiful in the world. She loved butterflies and strawberries and bedtime stories about brave princesses she would have adored. Emma and Grace. How did it happen? Drunk driver, Noah said simply. She was walking home from school, just 2 blocks from our house. He ran a red light and hit her in the crosswalk. She died instantly. Victoria felt her heart break for this man who had lost so much, yet had somehow found the strength to help her family heal. I'm so sorry, Noah. I can't imagine that kind of loss. It nearly destroyed me, he admitted. I lost my marriage, my business, my will to live. I spent 2 years in a very dark place before I found the grief support group where I met David. Helping other people cope with loss became my way of honoring Lily's memory. The pieces of Noah's story fell into place, explaining his intuitive understanding of childhood grief and his gentle approach to healing. He wasn't just a talented gardener. He was a man who had transformed his own devastating loss into a gift. For helping others, the garden of second chances over the following days. Victoria found herself processing Noah's revelations, while watching him continue his devoted care of their garden and her daughters. His connection to David, rather than feeling like a betrayal, began to seem like a gift her husband had. Somehow arranged from beyond the grave, the twins had noticed the tension between the adults, but seemed to sense that working through difficult emotions was part of the healing process they'd been learning about in the garden. They continued their daily routine of helping Noah with small tasks, while Victoria struggled with her conflicted feelings. Mrs. Sterling, Mrs. Rodriguez said one morning, as they watched Noah teaching the girls to harvest winter squash, "Forgive. An old woman's observation, but that man loves this family. Whatever troubles you're working through, don't let fear make you throw away something beautiful." Victoria knew the housekeeper was right. In the weeks since Noah's arrival, she had begun to feel alive again in ways that went beyond simply healing. From David's death, Noah made her laugh, challenged her intellectually, and treated her daughters with a tenderness that made her heart ache with longing. More importantly, he had never tried to replace David or erase his memory. Instead, he had helped them create space for both grief and joy, teaching them that love could coexist with loss and that opening their hearts to new possibilities didn't diminish what they had shared before. That afternoon, Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself. She asked Mrs. Rodriguez to watch the twins and invited Noah to join her for dinner at a small restaurant in town, away from the garden and the weight of their complicated history. "Are you sure?" Noah asked, uncertainty clear in his voice. "I know this situation is far from simple." "Nothing about love is simple," Victoria replied, the word love coming more easily than she'd expected. "But I think David would want us to figure this out together." Love Takes Root, the restaurant, was quiet and intimate, with soft lighting that made honest conversation feel safer. Over wine and a meal they both barely touched, Victoria and Noah talked about everything they had avoided discussing during their weeks of careful friendship. "I need to know that your feelings for me aren't just an extension of your promise to David," Victoria said directly. "I need to know that you see me as myself, not as his widow who needs protection." Noah reached across the table to take her hand, his touch sending familiar electricity through her veins. "Victoria, from the moment I saw you trying so hard to be strong for your daughters while falling apart inside, I was drawn to your courage. Yes, I came here because of David, but I stayed because of you. I fell in love with your fierce devotion to your children, your brilliant mind, your determination to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. And I fell in love with your gentleness," Victoria admitted, surprising herself with the admission. "With the way you see magic in ordinary things and helped my daughters remember how to hope. You gave us back our appetite for life, Noah, in every possible way." When Noah leaned across the table to kiss her, soft and tender in the candlelight, Victoria felt something inside her chest unfold like a flower finally receiving rain after a long drought. This wasn't the desperate passion of young love, but something deeper and more precious, the love of two people who understood loss and chose hope anyway. "I want to do this right," Noah murmured against her lips, slowly, with respect for everything you've been through and the girl's feelings. "I'd have time," Victoria agreed, her heart full to bursting. "I'd all the time in the world." The promise of spring 6 months later, as winter gave way to spring and the garden burst with new life. The Sterling family had transformed in ways Victoria could never have imagined. Emma and Grace had not only regained their lost weight, but had grown taller and stronger, their faces bright with the confidence that came from knowing they were deeply loved and secure. Noah had moved into the guest cottage on the estate, giving the family space to adjust to their new dynamic while remaining close enough to continue his daily work in the garden and his growing relationship with all three sterling women. The twins adored their Mr. Noah with the fierce loyalty children reserved for adults who truly understood them. They had created a special memorial garden for their father, where they planted his favorite flowers each spring and told stories about their memories of him. But they had also embraced Noah as the man who helped their hearts grow strong again. Victoria had found a balance between running Sterling Technologies and being present for her family's healing journey. The company had not only survived her temporary absence, but had thrived under the more collaborative leadership style she'd developed. She had learned that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, and that accepting help didn't diminish her strength. On a warm April morning, as Victoria watched Noah teaching the twins to plant sunflower seeds in the patch where David's original flowers had once grown, she marveled at how love had found a way to bloom again in soil she thought was too damaged to support new growth. "Mommy?" Emma called out, her hands dirty with rich earth and her face glowing with happiness. "Noah says these sunflowers will be giants by summer, tall enough to see all the way to heaven. Maybe Daddy will be able to see them from up there," Grace added thoughtfully. "And he'll know we're happy again." Victoria felt tears of gratitude rather than grief filling her eyes. David would indeed be happy to see his family flourishing, his garden restored, and his daughter's laughter filling the air once again. And he would approve of the gentle man who had honored his memory while creating space for new love to grow. As Noah looked up from the flower bed and smiled at her with eyes full of promise, Victoria knew that their story was no longer about loss and healing. It had become something more beautiful, a testament to love's ability to bloom again and again, season after season, in hearts brave enough to remain open to life's endless possibilities, in the garden where sorrow had once withered. Every growing thing, love had taken root again, stronger and more beautiful than ever before.